Hello, I'm Doug Silliman, president of the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, and I want to thank you for joining us for Outlook 2023, where AGSIW's scholars in leadership will tell you about what we're going to be covering in the coming year. An important set of issues we will cover will be great power relations with the Gulf. On China, Xi Jinping's December 2022 visit to Saudi Arabia shows China's ambitions to expand relations in the Gulf and the Gulf's willingness to reciprocate to some extent, although there is still an open question about whether China's uneven recovery from COVID will make this possible in 2023. Russia has doubled down on its military relationship with Iran, buying Iranian drones for use in Ukraine, but considering selling advanced fighter aircraft to Iran. That could erode the air superiority that Arab Gulf states have enjoyed in the past. This could also have Arab Gulf states rethink the relations with Russia, but probably not change their mind about the Russia-Ukraine war. The Biden administration has made great strides in improving relations with the Gulf states in the past year, but still has some work to do on the problematic but important relationship with Saudi Arabia. The administration has expanded maritime security cooperation in the Gulf through the deployment of unmanned sail drones, but is challenged in 2023 to replicate the success in air defense.
One big thing to watch in 2023 will be the course of China-Gulf relations. This has been an important topic for a number of years, but recent developments will bring it further into focus in 2023. The first of these developments was the high-profile trip of China's President Xi to the region to participate in a China-Arab summit, a China-GCC summit, and a state visit to Saudi Arabia. Far from being just a snub to Washington or some type of watershed moment for China-Middle East relations, the visit demonstrated quite clearly that Arab and Chinese government officials are willing to make a very visible show of relations and also leverage ties to accomplish strategic objectives. The second important development has to do with China's about-face on its zero COVID policy and the consequent reopening up of the country. This decision will create tremendous healthcare-related challenges, and it's likely to dampen growth and also potentially negatively impact the perception of China as a strong economic partner, at least over the short term. But China's economy will rebound, economic activity will eventually surge, and Chinese tourists will start to return to global tourism hubs like those in the Gulf. Regional governments and firms will therefore find a number of opportunities to exploit, but they're going to have to be very careful to take into account concerns from Washington and European capitals about collaboration that could cross red lines and potentially create a ceiling to closer cooperation in the future.
In 2023, I'm turning my gaze where the focus of the Gulf states seems to be, and that is in really accelerating these dramatic vision plans, these state transformations that are looking to deepen their global integration and to prepare for the energy transition. And I'm really looking at political and social challenges that are coming up from that. One, regional competition. This is really driven by Saudi Arabia, I think, and especially Saudi as the state making the biggest, most dramatic changes. It's the biggest state, the biggest market, and really with a leadership not afraid to throw their strategic and economic weight around. That's something to watch. A second thing is how are the populations reacting, especially among signs of some emerging populism, both economic and cultural, sort of a cultural backlash to what are really, really big cultural changes taking place. And third, finally, where is the private sector in all of this? Especially where it seems like all of these vision plans are very, very state-dominated, state-driven, and states seem quite willing to squeeze out and even pressure or replace these old business families. And on the other hand, you also have populations that are a lot of the resentments being thrown against the private sector too. So these are definitely three things to watch and three things that I'll be looking at in 2023.
I see Gulf intervention and extrication from regional conflicts as a continuing theme for 2023. Regarding these interventions, It's still accurate, I think, to describe the overall dynamic as one of retrenchment and extrication from conflicts, and this will continue, but interventions are still underway. AGSIW will be tracking lingering Gulf involvements in regional hotspots this year, including Saudi direct involvement and Emirati indirect involvement in the Yemen conflict. Also, the UAE continues to be involved in Libya. There are some signs of retrenchment, I should note, as the UAE continues a foreign policy based more on soft power and diplomacy and continues a broader rapprochement with Turkey, another key player in Libya. Extrication from the Syria conflict for Gulf countries occurred years ago, and diplomatic normalization with Damascus will continue. The broader dynamic of extrication from conflicts is supported by the year's series of political rapprochement, whether Ankara and Abu Dhabi or Cairo and Doha, among others. The UAE's and Bahrain's new relations with Israel through the Abraham Accords reinforce this theme of extrication from past conflict.
This year, I think, is going to be steady as she goes for the Gulf countries if they can have their way. They're all in on politics, diplomacy, and commerce versus conflict and confrontation. They all like that for various reasons. The GCC rapprochement is going extremely well. You saw that at the World Cup in Qatar. That shouldn't be underestimated. It's potent, but it also shouldn't be overstated because it only goes so far. One of the big pitfalls still out there for this year is U.S.-Saudi tensions. Because Saudi Arabia is banking so much on oil pricing through the OPEC Plus arrangement, mainly with Russia, it's still possible in an energy crunch for Riyadh to be perceived in the United States as basically siding with Russia against Ukraine. And that could be a big problem if things go badly for oil pricing. Finally, Iran remains the great unknown. It could turn to more conflict and confrontation if it feels desperate, or if the protest movement in Iran starts to die down and they feel a greater hand to do that. Either way, that could happen. Now, the Gulf countries, especially UAE and Saudi, have been pursuing a dual strategy. Dialogue with Iran, yes, but also participating in the new regime of containment and deterrent the U.S. is building together. That works really well as long as confrontation doesn't make dialogue impossible. And that is another pitfall that could emerge in the coming year.
Ever since September 2022, Iran has found itself in a state of political stalemate. The protesters cannot overthrow the government, and the regime of the Islamic Republic is incapable of persuading them to clear the streets and go home. This crisis is likely to continue in 2023. The domestic crisis is also likely to have impact on Iran's relations with neighboring countries, in particular Saudi Arabia, whom Iran accuses of inciting the protests within Iran through Saudi-financed media broadcasting to the country from London. So the risk of conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia is heightened, and we should expect greater instability. We should also expect greater instability when it comes to Iran's nuclear program. The nuclear deal between Iran and the world powers is still not revived, and it is a distinct possibility that Iran may continue its efforts in the field of nuclearization, and that, of course, may create bigger problems and eventually even a very, very important crisis between Iran and Israel, and perhaps also Iran and the United States. So in other words, in 2023, we should be expecting greater regional instability than even back in 2022.